Well, good morning. It's lovely to have a glorious sunny day for us here where we are. I hope it is the same wherever abouts it may be that you're tuning in from or re-watching from during the day. As you can also see, I've got a bit of the lockdown hair going on today, and this is all just because of how I'm letting it dry, and it's all going a little bit crazy. But I thought, might as well show it off on the video. Why not? So today I'm going to be reading from Psalm 81, and I'm going to be reading it from the Passion Translation this morning. Lord, just singing about you makes me strong, so I'll keep shouting for joy. To Jacob's God, my champion, let the celebration begin. I will sing with drum accompaniment and with the sweet sound of the harp and guitar strumming. Go ahead, blow the Jubilee trumpet to begin the feast. Blow it before every joyous celebration and festival. For God has given us these seasons of joy, days that He decreed for us to celebrate and rejoice. He's given us these feasts to remind us of His triumphs over Egypt, which ended our slavery in a strange and foreign land. Then I heard the message in an unknown tongue, as He said to me, I have removed your back-breaking burdens and have freed your hands from the hard labor and toil. You called out to me in your time of trouble, and I rescued you. I came down from the realm of the secret place of thunder where mysteries hide. I came down to save you. I tested your hearts at the place where there was no water to drink, the place of your bitter argument with me. Listen to me, my dear people, for I am warning you, and you better listen well, for I hold something against you. Don't ever be guilty of worshipping any other god but me. I am your only God, the living God. Wasn't I the one who broke the strongholds over you and raised you up out of bondage? Open your mouth with a mighty decree. I will fulfill it now, you'll see. The words that you speak, so shall it be. But my people still wouldn't listen. My princely people would not yield to me. So I lifted my grace from off of their lives and I surrendered them to the stubbornness of their hearts, for they were living according to their own selfish fantasies. Oh, that my people would once and for all listen to me and walk faithfully in my footsteps, following my ways. Then, and only then, will I conquer your every foe and tell every one of them, you must go. Those who hate my ways will cringe before me, and their punishment will be eternal. But I will feed you with my spiritual bread. You will feast and be satisfied with me, feeding on my revelation truth like honey, dripping from the cliffs of the high place. If you heard that in the background, that was my dog sneezing. That's a great way to start. So this psalm, I've decided again to split across 2 days. I think there's so much in it. So you'll actually have me again tomorrow morning, and we'll pick up the final kind of few verses. So this morning, I'm just going to really look at the first 7 verses, verses 1 through to 7, up to, if in your scripture it might say Selah or pause in His presence, up to that moment in this psalm. And this psalm, it starts in a place kind of joy with this psalmist, and the psalmist again here is Asaph, who we've come across in a few of the others, and here he is making a declaration about the very nature of triumphant praise and remembrance songs of joy to God, songs about the very nature of God, just singing about Him. There are many songs that we have in our own church traditions and our own kind of Christian communities that we sing, and there may be particular ones that kind of resonate on your heart, but there are ones singing about the very nature of who He is, this greatness, this goodness. He's a good Father. We are singing about His characteristics. And Asaph here is exhorting us all through his own poetic song to be making declarations about who God is and to make these songs heard. There's something he touches on here about a process that is activated as we do this, where our entire being begins to draw from the well of God, and this begins to replenish our strength. This is what he is equating praise and these celebration kind of moments and these joyous songs with, that it's unlocking something where we are drawing from God. We are literally drawing from His strength instead of ours. We're filled to overflowing once again. Can you relate to that? When you are feeling low and you almost will yourself into joining in the triumphant song, do you notice the internal shift? Do you find yourself beginning to be filled once again with strength? In those moments, maybe at home when you're just feeling so low or feeling really up against it, and you just put on uh, whatever worship album it might be, or you tune into one of the radio stations and you just hear something of the word, or you hear one of those songs that just brings your spirit to life again. It brings you, it fills you with that strength of God again. It literally is drawing from his well. It's the deep calling out to deep and engaging in the unseen, spirit to spirit. And it then retunes our entire being, if you like. Mike Pilavachi from Soul Survivor, I've heard him use this analogy a lot of our life, our being like a radio antenna, and it's just finding the frequency and praising and engaging in this celebration praise, this triumphant, joyous worship of God. It's like retuning our antenna to be picking up God's signal again. And when we've got it tuned in, we are flowing through him, we are flowing in him, and all his presence, his strength, his goodness, his peace, it all flows in. It fills us again. But it's not just our spirits that receive that, it is our bodies and our souls that are also drawn into the same alignment. Without going into kind of too much on it now this morning, you might have also heard of the stories in those moments of worship and praise as the church gathers, where people's bodies are made whole, people are healed, people are set free from bondage, people receive kind of emotional healing and things of the internal that are not necessarily physically related, but are this kind of intangible stuff on the inside. This all happens in that same context and space of joyous, triumphant praise. And then in this psalm, with the inclusion in verse 2 of the suggestion of a beat, it's talking here about the tambourine, or this kind of drum beat. It's drawing us into this celebration, this praise, even more so. And the drum instrument here is kind of a suggestion of full body worship. And I don't mean kind of the full body in a sense of sound, what we're hearing, but full body in a sense of what we do with our own bodies. It conjures the image of wild and joyful praise that not only involves us singing, but also involves us moving in celebration. It is an encouragement to dance and be joyful in our full body praise. And I don't know about you, but when I've seen people so ecstatic, so full of excitement and joy, they can't stay still. They can't just stand still. They have to move. It's something about this excitement where they bounce up and down, or they're sort of letting sounds out of joy and glee. They are moving about in the same process. And it's kind of like a joyful celebration you might expect to find at a wedding or an equivalent kind of celebration or festival. In Hazelmere here, where many of us are, we have a kind of a biannual summer festival called the Fringe, sadly unable to run this year. But there you see this thing in action, to the beat and to the sound of people enjoying this music. They are moving. They are not only singing along, but they are also moving with it. And admittedly, it might be very British moving. We don't necessarily all have those amazing dancing feet, but it's moving nonetheless. It's that moving in time with the beat, moving in time with the celebration and the triumph. And Asaph here is encouraging us to be doing this in our worship gatherings too. The context in this psalm refers to the special feasts and celebrations where the Israelites gathered to remember and celebrate God. And in the process of these, they lavish their praise and worship on God through their joyful celebration. And it's just a little bit like the fact that one of the things that we have kind of ordained and structured in our church calendars is to meet once a week. It's good for us to do that. And it's here in these very moments where we would meet, where the early church would meet, they would break bread, they would share in communion, they would hear of the word, and they would sing praise. It's just these same sort of rhythms. But then we also have these bigger moments in our calendar as well, which I'll briefly touch on shortly. But speaking about the first few verses of the psalm, James Boyce points out, and I'm quoting from him, that Franz Delcek, if I've got his name correct, one of the great German commentators, points out that the summons in verse 1 is to the whole congregation. Then the summons in verse 2 is to the Levites, who were the appointed temple singers and musicians. And then the summons in verse 3 is to the priests, who had the specific task of blowing the trumpets. Now, why is this important? Well, again, without going into too much detail about the Levitical calling and the priestly calling in the Old Testament, although that I think would make a fantastic sermon series, what this quote summarizes is the fact that there were particular roles assigned to particular people, and some larger callings even assigned to particular tribes. Now, the Levitical call was a holy call to tend to God first and foremost through their actions and lifestyle. And this was often done in the form of being temple musicians and singers offering praise to God. It was about attending to and caring for the service of the sanctuary. Now, the priestly call was specifically linked to the descendants of Aaron and the Aaronic priesthood. They were ordained to be priests that tended to the Lord in the temple through the ministry of the sacrifices at the altar. They were the ones in the robes that would enter in and be making the offerings at the different points and in accordance with the celebrations and the festivals and so on. Now, all priestly roles, however, were performed by descendants of the tribe of Levi. All of that was assigned to them, with the Levites, the ordinary priest, the Aaronic priesthood, as well as the high priest. But there was a call at the same time upon the whole of Israel, every single tribe, and this was a call to make known the nature of God, to reveal him to the nations and speak of the good news, which at the time was of the character and nature of who he was. It wasn't yet about Jesus. They hadn't quite had that revelation. They hadn't had that revelation. So instead, it was about making God known. They were called to worship, and the joyous celebration and praise that occurred at these festivals enacted this call, and in turn, it also fulfilled the call to make known the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of Abraham to all, for everyone, for the nations, because the joyous praise was loud and triumphant, and it could not be missed. Well, as already mentioned, the joyous and triumphant celebrations was in tune with keeping kind of these remembrance seasons, these remembrance festivals, as a way of celebrating what God has done and reminding themselves of all that God had done before. It was a statute for them to follow and was instructed as a way of remembering and continuing to honor and extol God. But it also provided a mechanism for establishing testimony among the people of God and sharing in the wonders and signs of God. It created a moment for people to gather together and share, again, like what we do in our weekly gatherings, sometimes even more so when we gather as church. We are encouraged to be sharing the testimonies. What has God done? What are the wonders and signs we've seen him do? These remembrance and celebration festivals were times for the Israelites to do just that. And the story that is then regaled in this psalm is of the Exodus from Egypt. It is a testimony of the nature of God as deliverer and rescuer. It acted, if you like, as an invitation for covenant renewal between the people of God and the Lord himself. I'll say that again. It acted, if you like, as an invitation for covenant renewal between the people of God and the Lord himself. It was a place where the Israelites could come back and remember the covenant established at the time of Exodus and could renew those vows and reset themselves back upon God. And it then also served as a call upon the Israelites to never forget. Passover itself was a festival to remember the season of Israel's history and to honor God for all he did. It had been a journey of learning through relationship, and at times we can read in biblical accounts where individuals struggled, or the whole of Israel struggled in this process. But it was still a sense of calling them back to that place of remembering. This miraculous deliverance and the journey it began was education by encounter. It was learning in each step and in every encounter. It was relational. It was meant to be. It was designed to be relational. And so Passover was also a celebration and remembrance of the covenant relationship between Israel and God, not just about remembering what God had done in the Exodus account, but of the covenant relationship between Israel and God, of the relationship continually explored by encounter through which they continue to then add story upon story of which to celebrate. And there are these moments in our own walk and our own life, and I touched on it not this morning, I touched on it on Sunday when speaking from James chapter 4, of that sense of remembering and being called back to that place of remembering. And it was almost like it was an easier place for Israel to then reset on, when you're kind of filled in that praise and filled with all that joy, and when you put yourself in a place of just speaking to God and speaking of the nature of who he is, it kind of resets us. It gets rid of all the kind of the cloudiness and the fogginess at times, and kind of brings into focus a greater clarity. And I'd argue it's in that place of greater clarity that it's so much easier to then choose God. And it's like, yes, God, this is who you are. You are the God of this. You are the God of peace, the God of salvation, the God of joy. It's so much easier to go, yes, God, with you. I will do this with you, is the choice I talked about from James chapter 4. And again, it's almost that choice here of coming back, reminding yourself, resetting yourself in that covenant relationship with God. It is, as I've just seen pop up in the comments, that sitting on the veranda, sitting on the porch with God, just taking that moment out, just being in relationship with God. So then verses 1 to 7, verse 7 concludes this segment of the psalm. And in the Hebrew, and actually in some of our English translations as well, or not in the one I read today, but it also includes the word meribah, which I think I said correctly, the Hebrew word meribah, which means the place of strife and contention. Again, harking back to my talk from James 4, if you saw that on Sunday, the strife and contention. This is the direct reference, however, back to the rock that was split in two and from which water came. This was a place of nourishment and rejuvenation for Israel while wandering in the desert. Now, what are the moments in our own calendars where we join in joyous celebration and praise and remember who God is? I said that, we gather weekly, but there are also some key ones such as Christmas and Easter. We might also think of some other better known moments too, such as Pentecost, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. But what other reasons do we have to celebrate? As followers of Jesus, we carry good news and an eternal hope. We can now speak of the salvation of Jesus. We can tell the world who this man is. We are infused with kingdom characteristics and can relate that wherever we intersect with this world, we can radiate that out. So whenever and wherever possible, I encourage us to celebrate and create an occasion on which joyous praise can erupt. Jesus himself was a fan of parties and celebrations. We see that in the Gospels. He attended many, particularly feasts, and he often shared stories of the nature and the person of God, drawing the minds of those listening back to key moments in Jewish history. He was creating moments to remember, sparking reminders, if you like. And these moments spoke of the breakthrough nature of God, and they told of the wonders that he had done, much like the wonders spoken of in Psalm 81 and the remembering through the account of the Exodus story. So to close, there is a song called River in the Rock, and I've posted a link to it in this chat, so hopefully you can find it across YouTube and Facebook. And what I've done is I posted you a link not just to the track, but to the place where Audrey Assad, who wrote this song, spoke of it initially and what this song can invoke. And it draws from the story of Meribah, where God caused water to gush from the rock, river in the rock. And I just encourage us all today, wherever possible, whether it's listening to this track or not, to take a moment out, listen perhaps to this track today and celebrate all that God has done, that he is doing and will do. And if you're not able to listen to the track, still try and take that moment, set it aside, even if it's right after I finish this live stream, to celebrate all that God has done, is doing and will do. And you might find it helpful to write it down, to almost draw your own psalm, your own poetry to God, remembering what it is that he has done, putting, if you like, your own Psalm 81 context rather than the Exodus story, a story of your own, or or a biblical story that really resonates with you, but try drawing into that place where you can celebrate what it is that he has done, what it is that he is doing, and look in faith to celebrate what it is that he will do. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow where we'll look at verses 8 through to 16.